The kitchen sink had been overflowing with water for several minutes, but neither Michael nor Nancy paid any attention to it. Their voices grew louder and louder in the small apartment on the second floor of an apartment building in Memphis. "I told you to buy milk." Nancy stood by the open refrigerator, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "How am I supposed to make breakfast without milk?" Michael sat at the kitchen table in his dispatcher's uniform, his shirt still unbuttoned. The fatigue from yesterday's shift weighed heavily on his shoulders, and now this argument first thing in the morning. "Nancy, listen, I forgot, okay? I just forgot. My mind was preoccupied with work. You know how stressful things are at the warehouse right now." "Forgot." She slammed the refrigerator door so hard that the magnets with photos of their honeymoon shook. "You always forget. You forgot the milk. You forgot about meeting my parents last week. You forgot about our anniversary last month." Michael stood up from the table, feeling the familiar anger boiling up inside him. This woman knew how to make him furious with just her tone of voice. "Don't start with the anniversary again. I apologized then, we talked it all out. And anyway, stop yelling at me." "I'm not yelling," Nancy shouted, then immediately stopped, realizing how absurd her words were. Michael laughed, but it was a bitter, angry laugh. "Yeah, right, you're not yelling. What is it then? Meditation?" Nancy grabbed a mug from the table and threw it forcefully into the sink. The ceramic shattered with a clang, and shards flew in all directions. One of them cut her finger painfully. "Damn it." She looked at the drop of blood. "Now you're breaking dishes too." Michael came closer, his voice dangerously quiet. "Great! Just great! What else can I do? How else can I get through to you?" Nancy turned to him, tears in her eyes. "Michael, I'm tired. I'm tired of you not listening to me. We live like roommates, not like husband and wife." Something in her voice, that genuine pain, cooled Michael's anger for a second. But then he saw the broken mug, heard the music turned up louder on the other side of the wall, clearly in protest of their argument, and his anger returned with renewed force. "You know what, Nancy? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe you've just turned into a perpetually dissatisfied wife who throws tantrums over every little thing." He grabbed a plate from the table and threw it on the floor with all his might. White shards scattered across the linoleum. "Michael!" Nancy recoiled. "What, Michael? Now I don't have the right to express my feelings either?" He picked up another plate, but at that moment there was a knock at the door. The knock was insistent, clearly angry. "Who else is there?" Michael muttered, still holding the plate. The knock repeated, even louder. "Open up!" "It's Gloria from apartment 23. Nancy and Michael exchanged glances. Gloria Reynolds, their downstairs neighbor, was a fairly patient woman, but when she lost her temper, it was best not to cross her. Michael threw the plate into the sink, where it shattered with a clatter, and went to open the door. Nancy watched him go, then crouched down and began picking up the pieces from the floor. "What do you want?" Michael opened the door, not even hiding his irritation. Gloria stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, her usually neatly styled hair tousled. Apparently, their argument had woken her up on her day off. "I need you to stop yelling," she said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. "It's 7 a.m, Michael. I've had a rough week. I wanted to sleep, and you're throwing a circus here. Listen, Gloria, this is our apartment, and we have the right—" "Right?" She raised her voice. "And I have the right to peace and quiet in my own home. You break dishes and yell at each other every weekend. I'm tired of it." Michael felt his anger boiling up again. First his wife, now his neighbor was meddling in his business. "You know what, Gloria? If you don't like the noise, move. Buy yourself a house somewhere outside the city where there are no neighbors. Until then, don't tell me how to live in my own apartment." Gloria took a step back, clearly not expecting such aggression. "Michael, I just asked—" "You didn't ask anything. You came here to give orders, so go to hell with your complaints, and don't knock on our door again." He slammed the door right in her face and turned to Nancy, who was still sitting on the floor among the broken glass. "Michael, why are you treating her like that?" Nancy asked quietly. "She's right. We are noisy." "Don't start," he snapped. "That's all I need, you taking her side." He walked into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. A few minutes later, Nancy heard him getting dressed. Then the front door slammed again, and the apartment fell silent. Nancy remained sitting on the kitchen floor, holding the shards of their life together in her hands. The Friendship Bar was a 10-minute walk from their home. Michael often went there after particularly difficult days at work or after arguments with his wife. The bar was simple: wooden tables, worn leather couches, dim lighting. It was a gathering place for working people like them, who came to drink beer and forget their problems. When Michael walked in, James Mitchell and Derek Brown, his colleagues from the warehouse, were already sitting at one of the tables. They had been working together for more than 5 years and had become true friends. "Mike!" James waved at him. "Come here, we were just talking about you." Michael approached their table and collapsed into a chair as if he had been knocked down. "Order a beer," said Derek, a fat man with a kind face and perpetually smiling eyes. "I can tell by the look on your face that you've had a rough day." "Yeah." Michael caught the bartender's eye and pointed to a bottle of beer. "Nancy started yelling at me this morning over milk. Over damn milk, James. And then the neighbor came over and started lecturing me on how to live my life." James, a tall, thin man with intelligent eyes, shook his head. "Women, brother. They can make a mountain out of a molehill. Last week, my Sheila lectured me for 2 hours about how I don't fold the towels properly in the closet." "Towels?" Derek laughed. "That's nothing. My Lorna can sulk for half a day because I forgot to put the coffee mug in the dishwasher." Michael took a sip of beer and felt the tension gradually ease. "But you know, guys, sometimes I think it's not about the milk or the towels. Something between us has broken. We're constantly arguing, constantly misunderstanding each other." James looked at his friend seriously. "Mike, when was the last time you spent time together? Not just dinner at home in front of the TV, but really together?" Michael thought about it. When was the last time? They were so caught up in their routine, work, home, sleep, work again, that they forgot about each other. "I don't remember," he admitted honestly. "You see," Derek leaned closer, "I've been married to Lorna for 12 years. You know what I've realized? Marriage is like a car. If you don't take care of it, fill it up, fix it, it will break down." "What do you suggest?" Michael asked. "Make up," James said simply. "Go home, apologize, buy flowers. Suggest going somewhere together. To the movies, to a restaurant. Remember why you fell in love with each other?" Derek nodded. "James is right. Pride is a bad advisor in family life. Someone has to take the first step." Michael finished his beer and looked at his watch. It was almost 9 o'clock. Nancy was probably worried about where he was. "Thanks, guys," he said, getting up from the table. "You're right. I'm going home to make up." "Good luck, brother," James wished him. When Michael returned home, Nancy was sitting in the living room with a book. She looked up at him, and he saw tiredness and sadness in her eyes. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi." Michael sat down next to her on the sofa. "Nance, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I yelled at you, and I'm sorry I was so rude to Gloria." Nancy put her book down. "I'm sorry I broke the mug, too, and that I yelled at you." They were silent for a moment, each thinking about what had happened. "You know," Michael said, "maybe James is right. We've forgotten how to be together. When was the last time we went on a date?" Nancy smiled, and that smile warmed Michael's heart. "It's been a long time. A very long time." "Then let's fix that tomorrow." He took her hand. "Now let's go to bed. I have an early shift tomorrow." The next morning, Michael woke up determined to make things right. He got up earlier than usual, made coffee for Nancy, and left a note on the refrigerator. "I love you." Let's talk about our plans for the weekend tonight. On his way to work, he stopped by Gloria's apartment. The woman opened the door cautiously, clearly not expecting his visit. "Michael?" Her voice sounded wary. "Gloria, I came to apologize," he said, lowering his eyes. "I was wrong yesterday. I shouldn't have talked to you like that." Gloria studied his face, as if trying to figure out if he was being sincere. "Well," she finally said, "thank you for coming. I accept your apology. I understand that everyone has difficult days. Nancy and I really do have problems," Michael admitted. "We don't know how to talk to each other without arguing." Gloria paused, then said, "You know, Michael, I went through a divorce 3 years ago. It was very painful. I thought I would never be able to trust people again or build relationships. A psychotherapist helped me." "A therapist?" Michael frowned. In his mind, only people with serious problems went to therapists. "Yes, Dorothy Anderson. She helped me understand myself and learn how to communicate. Maybe you should see her too. She sees couples." Michael thought about it. The idea seemed strange, but at the same time, what if it really helped? "Where does she see patients?" "On Madison Street, near the hospital. Would you like me to give you her number?" "Yes, thank you." Gloria wrote the number on a piece of paper and handed it to Michael. "She's a good specialist." "And a good person?" It had been a particularly stressful day at work. Michael had made a mistake on the delivery note, which resulted in an entire shipment of goods being sent to the wrong address. His boss, Mr. Roberts, called him into his office. "Taylor, what's going on with you?" Roberts, a gray-haired man with a perpetually dissatisfied expression, looked at Michael over his glasses. "This is the third mistake this week. We never had these kinds of problems with you before." "I'm sorry, Mr. Roberts. I'm having some problems at home, but it won't happen again." "Home is home, and work is work," his boss said sternly. "I understand that everyone has personal problems, but when they start to affect your work, it becomes my problem. Get yourself together, Taylor." "Yes, sir." "Go on." "And be more careful next time." Michael returned to his desk with a heavy heart. James, who worked at the next desk, looked at him sympathetically. "Did you get it bad?" "Not really." "But he's right. I have been inattentive. Is it because of your problems with Nancy?" "Yes. You know, James, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. Maybe we really do need help." "What kind of help?" Michael took a piece of paper with a phone number out of his pocket. "My neighbor gave me the number of a family therapist. She says it helped her a lot." James raised his eyebrows. "A therapist? Are you seriously considering this?" "I don't know. What do you think?" James paused, considering his response. "Listen, if there's a chance to save your marriage, why not try? It certainly won't make things worse." When Michael returned home that evening, Nancy had already prepared dinner. She greeted him with a smile and a kiss, and the house was filled with a peaceful atmosphere. Over dinner, they talked about work and their plans for the weekend, carefully avoiding any sensitive topics. But Michael felt that this fragile harmony could be shattered at any moment. After dinner, as they were washing the dishes, he decided to speak up. "Nancy, I talked to Gloria today. I apologized for yesterday." "That's good." Nancy rinsed the plate and put it in the dish rack. "She's a kind woman." "Yes, and she gave me some advice." Nancy turned to him. "What was it?" Michael took out the piece of paper with the phone number. "She suggested we see a family therapist. A woman who helped her once." Nancy stared silently at the piece of paper, and Michael couldn't read her expression. "What do you think?" he asked cautiously. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I've never thought about it." "Me neither. But maybe we should try. We love each other, Nance. We just don't know how to show it properly." Nancy dried her hands with a towel and sat down at the kitchen table. "What are we going to do there? Tell a stranger about our problems? Gloria says it helps us understand each other, learn to talk without arguing." Nancy was silent for a long time, and Michael was afraid she would refuse, but then she looked up at him. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's try it." Dorothy Anderson's office was on the second floor of a small building on Madison Street, next to the hospital where Nancy worked. Michael parked their old sedan by the sidewalk and looked at his wife. Nancy was nervously fiddling with the strap of her purse, and he could see how tense her shoulders were. "It'll be okay," he said quietly, covering her hand with his. "I know," she replied, but her voice betrayed her nervousness. "I just never thought I'd be sitting in a therapist's office talking about our problems." "Me neither. But Gloria says it helps." They climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. The door, with the sign "Dorothy Anderson Family Therapist," was painted a soothing blue. Michael knocked, and a moment later, the door opened. Dorothy Anderson was a middle-aged woman with kind brown eyes and a gentle smile. Her graying hair was neatly pulled back into a low bun, and she was wearing a simple blue blouse and dark pants. Everything about her appearance spoke of professionalism and warmth at the same time. "Michael and Nancy Taylor?" she asked, her voice sounding genuinely friendly. "Yes, that's us," Michael replied. "Please come in. My name is Dorothy." The office was decorated in warm colors. Soft armchairs faced each other, with a small table and a box of tissues between them. Diplomas and several tranquil landscapes hung on the walls. There was a desk by the window, but Dorothy did not sit down at it, choosing instead an armchair opposite the couple. "Tell me what brought you to me," she began when they had settled into their chairs. Michael and Nancy exchanged glances. Who should start? Finally, Michael cleared his throat. "We fight all the time, about everything. Last weekend we had a fight over milk." "Milk?" Dorothy tilted her head, showing that she was listening attentively. "I forgot to buy it," Michael continued, "and Nancy got angry. We started yelling at each other and throwing dishes. Our neighbor came to complain about the noise." "I understand," Dorothy nodded. "How long have you been having these arguments?" Nancy finally spoke. "About 6 months. We used to argue sometimes, but not like this. Not so cruelly." "Cruelly is an interesting word," Dorothy remarked. "What do you mean?" "We say hurtful things to each other," Nancy said quietly. "We bring up old grievances. And then we don't talk for a long time." Dorothy wrote something down in her notebook. "When do you feel close to each other?" The couple exchanged glances again. It was a difficult question. "We used to spend a lot of time together," Michael said. "We went to the movies, walked in the park. And now, I can't remember the last time we did anything together except household chores. We've become like neighbors," Nancy added. "We live in the same apartment, but we're each on our own." Dorothy nodded in understanding. "This is a very common problem. Everyday life consumes us, and we forget to nurture our relationships. Tell me, what initially attracted you to each other?" Michael smiled for the first time since they had arrived. Nancy was the most beautiful nurse in the hospital, but she wasn't just beautiful. She was so caring, so attentive to her patients. I realized she had a kind heart. Nancy blushed. And Michael was so reliable. When we first met, he always kept his word. If he promised to call, he called. If he said he would pick me up from work, he would arrive on time. He was gentle and attentive with me. "That's wonderful," said Dorothy. "Those qualities haven't gone anywhere. They've just been buried under everyday worries and misunderstandings. Our job is to dig them back up." The first session lasted an hour. Dorothy mostly listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions. She didn't give advice or criticize, she just helped them take an honest look at their relationship. "See you next week at the same time?" she asked at the end. "Yes," Michael replied, surprised that he genuinely wanted to. On the way home, they were silent, each thinking about what they had heard. "What do you think?" Michael finally asked. "I don't know," Nancy replied honestly, "but I felt like she understood us." "Me too." The following week, they came to the second session feeling more confident. Dorothy suggested they do a simple exercise. "I want you to take turns talking about what upset you this week," she said. "But there's one condition. You have to talk about your feelings, not your partner's actions." "How so?" Michael didn't understand. Instead of, "You ignore me," say, "I feel lonely." Instead of, "You always forget," say, "I feel like I'm not important." It turned out to be harder than it seemed. Michael was used to blaming, not talking about his feelings. But gradually, with Dorothy's help, they began to find the right words. "When you come home and turn on the TV right away without saying hello," Nancy said, "I feel invisible." "And when you're silent at dinner," Michael replied, "I feel like I've done something wrong, but I don't know what." "Great," Dorothy encouraged them. "Now you're starting to hear each other, not just exchange complaints." By the third session, they were already looking forward to meeting. Dorothy gave them homework, to spend at least half an hour together every evening without TV or phones. "Just talk," she said, "about anything. About work, about dreams, about what you saw on the street. The main thing is to listen to each other." At first, those half hours were difficult. They were unaccustomed to simple communication, but gradually the conversations became easier and more interesting. "Do you remember," Nancy said one evening, "how we dreamed of going on vacation to New Orleans?" "I remember," Michael smiled. "You wanted to try real jambalaya." "I still do." "Then let's go. We'll save up money next year and go." Nancy looked at him in surprise. It had been a long time since he had talked about plans for the future together. At the fourth session, Dorothy asked, "How are you feeling?" "Better," Michael said. "We argue less. And when we do argue, we make up faster." "We're talking again," Nancy added. "Not just about everyday things, but about things that matter to us." "That's wonderful. What has changed in your daily life?" "Michael has started hugging me more often," said Nancy, and Michael was surprised. He hadn't even noticed it himself. "And Nancy has stopped getting angry when I'm late from work," he said. "Now she asks me to call if I'm going to be late, and I do." "That's great progress," Dorothy smiled. "You're learning to care for each other, not control each other." After a month of therapy, the changes became noticeable not only to them. At work, James noticed that Michael had become calmer and more focused. "You seem younger," he said one day during lunch break. "What happened?" Michael told his friend about the therapy. "Really?" James raised his eyebrows. "And is it helping?" "It sure is. Nancy and I are getting to know each other all over again. Yesterday, she suggested we go to the movies. For the first time in 6 months, what did you see?" "A comedy. We laughed so hard that people were looking at us. Then we went to a cafe and sat there until midnight talking." James shook his head in surprise. "I never thought psychotherapy could help so much. How does Nancy feel about it?" "She was shy at first, but now she wants to go even more than I do. She says Dorothy helps her understand herself. Indeed, therapy changed not only their relationship, but each of them individually." Nancy became more confident, learned to speak directly about her needs without expecting Michael to guess them himself. Michael learned to control his anger and express his feelings with words instead of shouting. During the sixth session, Dorothy suggested another exercise. "I want you to remember the happiest moment in your relationship," she said. "Tell each other about it." Nancy was the first to remember their honeymoon. "We were in Atlanta," she said, looking into Michael's eyes. "We stayed in a small hotel, and every morning you brought me coffee in bed. And in the evening we walked around the city, holding hands. I felt like the happiest woman in the world." Michael smiled. "And I remember when you agreed to be my wife. We were sitting in the park by the lake, and I was so nervous that I forgot half of the speech I had prepared, and you cried with happiness and said yes without even hearing me out." "It was beautiful," Dorothy said quietly. "Now tell me, what's stopping you from feeling the same way now?" The couple thought about it. "I guess we stopped noticing each other," Nancy said. "We took each other for granted." "And we forgot to show our love," Michael added. We thought that since we were married, it was a given. Love needs to be nurtured every day, Dorothy said. It can't live on its own. After that session, they decided to go on a real date. Michael bought tickets to a new restaurant that had just opened in the city center. Nancy put on her best dress, the blue one he had worn when he proposed to her. "You look amazing," Michael said when she came out of the bedroom. "Thank you." She blushed like a girl on a first date. At the restaurant, they ordered wine and talked about everything under the sun: work, friends, plans for the future. Nancy told him about a difficult patient who was finally getting better. Michael shared his idea of enrolling in advanced training courses. "You know," he said, taking her hand across the table, "I had forgotten what an interesting conversationalist you are." "And I had forgotten what an attentive listener you are," she replied. They walked home, even though it was quite a distance. They wanted to prolong the evening. "Let's do this more often," Michael suggested. "Definitely. At least once a month." "At least once every 2 weeks," he corrected, and she laughed. The next day after work, Michael stopped by Gloria's place. His neighbor opened the door with surprise. "Michael, are you having problems again?" "On the contrary," he smiled. "I came to thank you." "For what?" "For recommending Dorothy Anderson to us. It changed our lives." Gloria smiled. "Really? So you're seeing her? For 2 months now. And you know what? We're happy again. Yesterday we went to a restaurant like newlyweds. I'm very happy for you," Gloria said sincerely. "Dorothy is a wonderful specialist. She helped me a lot too. Nancy and I would like to thank you somehow. Would you like to come over for dinner on Saturday?" Gloria thought about it. "I'd love to. I haven't been to a dinner party in a long time." "Great. How about 7? It's a date." On Saturday, Nancy prepared her signature dish, roast chicken with vegetables, and Michael bought some good wine. Gloria arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a box of chocolates. Over dinner, they told their neighbor about their success in therapy. Gloria listened with a smile. "You see how important it is to have the courage to acknowledge problems and seek help," she said. "Many couples divorce simply because they are too proud." "Yes," Michael agreed. "If it weren't for you, we would still be arguing over every little thing. Now we only fight about the big things," Nancy joked, and everyone laughed. After dinner, Gloria stayed for a couple more hours. They played cards and shared stories from their lives. Michael realized that his neighbor was an interesting and wise woman, whereas before he had seen her only as a source of complaints. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," Gloria said as she was leaving. "And thank you for giving me the chance to get to know you better." "Thank you," Nancy replied. "Now we'll see each other more often." At Dorothy's 8th session, they took stock of their progress. "Tell me what has changed in your relationship over the past 2 months," the therapist asked. "We've learned to listen to each other," Nancy said. "Before, we just waited for our turn to speak, but now we really listen. We're no longer afraid to talk about our feelings," Michael added, "and we've realized that it doesn't make us weak, but rather brings us closer together." "What else?" "We spend time together again," said Nancy. "We don't just live in the same apartment, we really live together. We go to the movies, to restaurants, we walk in the park. And we plan for the future," added Michael. "Before, we each thought only about tomorrow, but now we dream together." Dorothy wrote something down in her notebook. "These are wonderful changes. Is there anything else that worries you?" The couple exchanged glances. "Sometimes I feel like we're afraid of slipping back into our old habits," Nancy admitted, "that this period of happiness is temporary." "Those are normal fears," Dorothy reassured her. "Change takes time to take root. That's why it's important to keep working at it." "We will keep working at it," Michael said confidently. "We don't want to lose what we've gained." After the session, they went to a new shopping center that had recently opened on the outskirts of town. They walked around the stores, laughed at silly souvenirs, and bought each other small gifts. "You know," Nancy said as they sat in a cafe eating ice cream, "I can't remember the last time I felt this good." "I remember," Michael replied, "at the very beginning of our relationship. And I like that we were able to get back to that." "Not even get back to it," she corrected. "Build it again." But consciously, understanding what is important for happiness, Michael nodded. "Dorothy is right. Love is not just feelings, but work. Daily work. But pleasant work," Nancy smiled. That evening, as they were getting ready for bed, Nancy suddenly hugged Michael and pressed herself against him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up. For agreeing to therapy. For fighting for us." Michael kissed her on the top of her head. "We fought together, and we won." It seemed to them that the hardest part was behind them. They had learned to understand each other, found ways to express their feelings and needs, and brought romance and mutual respect back into their relationship. The therapy was working, and with each passing week, their bond grew stronger. 3 months had passed since they started therapy when Nancy first mentioned that she wanted to meet with Dorothy alone. They were sitting at breakfast on a Saturday morning, and sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating Michael's contented face. The last few weeks had been especially good. They felt like a real family. "Michael," Nancy began, setting down her coffee cup, "I'd like to talk to you about something." "Sure." He looked up from the newspaper. "What is it?" "I think I'd like to have one session with Dorothy individually." Michael frowned. Throughout their therapy, they had only ever gone together, and that seemed right. After all, they were working on their relationship. "Individually? Why?" Nancy nervously smoothed her hair. "There are some things that are difficult for me to discuss in your presence. Personal things." "What kind of personal things?" Michael's voice became wary. "We agreed to be honest with each other." "We are honest. It's just—" She hesitated. "Sometimes a person needs to figure things out for themselves before sharing with their partner." Michael put down the newspaper and looked closely at his wife. He saw something unfamiliar in her eyes, a mixture of determination and fear. "Nance, you're scaring me." "What are you talking about?" "Nothing scary," she said quickly. "Just about my past." "Things that happened before we met, your past?" Michael felt a knot in his stomach. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing's wrong. It's just, there are things I've never told anyone, and I need to figure out how to do it first." Mike was silent, thinking about her words. Part of him wanted to insist that she tell him everything right now. But another part remembered Dorothy's lessons about trust and respecting your partner's boundaries. "Okay," he finally said. "If you need to, go. But promise me we'll talk about everything afterwards." "I promise." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for understanding." But did he understand? Michael couldn't concentrate on work the whole next day. His thoughts kept returning to the morning conversation. What secrets did Nancy have? They had known each other for 5 years and had been married for 3. What past was she talking about? "You seem pensive today," James remarked during their lunch break. "Nancy wants to have individual therapy sessions," Michael shared. "She says there are things from her past that she needs to talk about separately." James raised his eyebrows. "What do you think about that?" "I don't know. On the one hand, everyone has a right to their personal space. On the other hand, we're a family. What secrets could there be?" "Maybe it's nothing serious," James suggested. "Maybe she just wants to discuss something intimate. Or family issues from her childhood." "You're probably right." Michael nodded, but he couldn't shake his uneasiness. That evening, Nancy was especially affectionate. She cooked his favorite meal and hugged him a lot. But Michael sensed something forced in her behavior, as if she were trying to compensate for the impending secret. The individual session was scheduled for Wednesday. That day, Michael waited for Nancy at home all evening, but she came home late and was silent. "How did it go?" he asked. "Fine." She sat down next to him on the sofa, but did not look him in the eye. "Dorothy really helped me figure some things out. And soon I'll be ready to talk to you. At our next joint session, Nance, you know you're making me nervous, right? Just tell me what it is." She finally looked at him and he saw tears in her eyes. "Please be patient a little longer. I need to do this right." Michael wanted to insist, but something in her voice stopped him. He just hugged his wife and didn't ask any more questions. The next few days dragged on agonizingly slowly. Nancy was distracted and nervous, and Michael felt a growing sense of anxiety. He made a few minor mistakes at work, for which he received a reprimand from his boss. "Taylor, what's going on with you?" Mr. Roberts asked. "A week ago you were working perfectly, and now you're inattentive again." "I'm sorry, sir." "Problems at home." "I thought you had solved them." "I did. But new ones have come up." Roberts shook his head. "Get your personal life sorted out, Taylor. I need employees who can focus on their work." Finally, the day of the joint session arrived. Michael woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest, as if he had a premonition of trouble. Nancy was also pale and silent. In Dorothy's office, they took their usual seats. The therapist immediately noticed the tension between the couple. "How are you?" she asked. "Nancy wants to tell me something," Michael replied, without waiting for his wife to speak. Dorothy looked at Nancy. "Are you ready?" Nancy nodded, but her hands were shaking. "Michael," she began, without looking up, "what I want to tell you is very difficult, and I'm afraid you'll take it the wrong way. Just say it." Michael's voice sounded tense. Nancy took a deep breath. "I haven't told you the whole truth about my past. About who I was before we met. Who were you?" Michael frowned. There was a long pause. Nancy finally looked up and looked him straight in the face. "I wasn't born a girl, Michael. I was a man, physically, and I went through a transition to become who I really am." Michael just stared at her for a few seconds, not understanding what he had heard. Then the words began to sink in, and he felt the world around him begin to crumble. "What?" was all he could say. "I'm a transgender woman," Nancy said quietly. "I always knew I was a woman, but I was born in a man's body. At the age of 22, I underwent a full course of therapy and surgery." "Wait!" Michael raised his hand. His face turned deathly pale. "Wait! Are you saying that you were a man?" "No," Nancy shook her head. "I was never a man. I've always been a woman, but—" "Don't tell me you've always been a woman." Michael's voice grew louder. "You just said you were born a man." "Michael, please, listen." "Listen?" He jumped up from his chair. "Listen to what? That my wife lied to me for 3 years? That I married a... Michael." Dorothy intervened in a calm but firm voice. "Let's sit down and discuss this calmly." "Calmly." Michael turned to the therapist, his eyes blazing with anger. "Did you know about this?" "I only knew what Nancy wanted to share with you," Dorothy replied cautiously. Michael turned back to his wife. Nancy sat huddled in her chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why?" His voice trembled with rage and pain. "Why didn't you tell me right away? When we met, when I proposed to you, I was afraid," Nancy whispered. "Afraid of losing you." "Lose me?" Michael laughed, but it was a hysterical laugh. "And now? Now you haven't lost me?" "Michael, I'm the same woman you fell in love with." Nancy stood up and tried to approach him. "Nothing has changed." "Nothing has changed?" Michael recoiled from her. "Everything has changed. Everything. I don't know who you are." "You know who I am," she cried. "I'm your wife who loves you." My wife wouldn't have lied to me for 3 years. Anger consumed Michael completely. Everything he thought about his life, his marriage, himself, crumbled to dust. He felt deceived, humiliated, betrayed, and in this whirlwind of rage, he grabbed the first thing that came to hand, a small wooden stool that stood next to Dorothy's desk. "Michael, don't!" Dorothy cried, rising from her chair. But it was too late. Michael swung the stool and struck Nancy on the head. A dull thud filled the office. Nancy fell to the floor, blood flowing from a wound on her temple. "What have you done?" Dorothy rushed to Nancy's side, trying to help her. "Get away!" Michael yelled, hitting the therapist on the shoulder with the stool. Dorothy fell, hitting her head on the edge of the table. Nancy lay on the floor, moaning and trying to get up. Blood covered her face. "Michael," she whispered. "Please." But Michael couldn't hear her words anymore. All he could hear in his head was the deafening roar of rage and pain. He threw the stool and grabbed his wife by the throat. 3 years! He shouted, squeezing his fingers tighter. "You've been lying to me for 3 years!" Nancy tried to break free, but the strength was unequal. Her eyes widened in horror as she gasped for air that couldn't pass through her constricted throat. "Michael, stop," she managed to say. But he didn't stop. Anger blinded him completely. He squeezed harder and harder, until Nancy stopped resisting, until her arms fell lifelessly to the floor, until her eyes glazed over. Finally, Michael loosened his grip and recoiled. Nancy lay motionless, her neck covered with dark marks from her husband's fingers. "Nance," he called softly. "Nancy." She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. She would never answer again. Michael knelt down next to his wife's body. His anger evaporated as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only an icy emptiness and the horror of realization. "What have I done?" he whispered. "My God, what have I done?" He looked at his hands, the very hands that had gently stroked her hair that morning and now had taken her life. In the corner of the study, Dorothy slowly regained consciousness. She opened her eyes, saw Nancy lying there and Michael sitting next to her, and realized that something irreparable had happened. "You killed her," she said quietly. Michael looked up at her with empty eyes. "She lied to me," he repeated mechanically. "She lied to me for 3 years." "She loved you," Dorothy said, sitting up with difficulty, holding her bruised shoulder. "And she was afraid of losing you." "I didn't know," Michael shook his head. "I didn't know that I was capable of such a thing." Dorothy fumbled for her phone in her pocket. "I'm calling the police." "Yes," Michael nodded. "Call them." He no longer resisted. He didn't try to run or make excuses. He just sat next to the body of the woman he once loved more than life itself, and tried to understand how love could turn into such destructive rage. In the last moments of her life, Nancy probably saw hatred in his eyes, not love. And that was the worst part.